If you're just joining us, let me catch you up on the story that broke the internet and divided families across America. Part 1 was about Keisha Washington, a single mother from Southside Chicago who sacrificed everything to raise her son Jamal. We're talking 30 years of working multiple jobs, selling her grandmother's wedding ring to pay his college housing deposit, and giving up her own dreams so he could chase his. When Jamal became a $50 million tech entrepreneur, he repaid her love by telling the world she didn't exist. In every interview, every magazine profile, every success story, he claimed he was raised in foster care by a grandmother who died. He built his entire brand on being a self-made orphan while his mother watched him lie about her on national television. Then karma hit. Jamal lost everything in a business scandal and showed up at Keisha's door begging for help. Not apologizing, not saying he missed her, just needing a place to crash until he figured things out. And Keisha did something that split the internet in half. She looked at her son and said, "I don't have a son," then closed the door in his face. Half of you called her the strongest woman alive. The other half called her the worst mother in history. The comments on that video are still going strong 6 months later. But here's what you don't know. Here's what happened after that door closed. And trust me, part 2 is going to make part 1 look like a fairy tale. Because sometimes getting what you deserve isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a whole new nightmare. And I'm warning you right now, by the end of this story, you're either going to want to start a GoFundMe for Keisha, or you're going to think she's the most vindictive woman who ever lived. There is no middle ground here. So buckle up, because part 2 starts with Jamal sleeping in his car and ends with a plot twist that's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about forgiveness, family, and second chances. It's been 8 months since Keisha closed that door on Jamal, and both their lives have changed in ways nobody could have predicted. Let's start with Jamal, because his fall from grace makes Icarus look like he had a soft landing. After Keisha refused to help him, Jamal spent the first week sleeping in his BMW. The same BMW that used to be a symbol of his success became his bedroom, his office, and his reality check all rolled into one. He parked it in different locations around Chicago, trying to avoid the repo man who was hunting for it. On day 8 they found it. Jamal watched from across the street as they loaded his car onto a flatbed truck. The car he used to drive to investor meetings, the car he'd taken on weekend trips to Ashley's parents' lake house, the car that cost more than his mother made in 2 years. That's when he ended up at the Madison Street homeless shelter, just like Keisha had suggested. Now I want you to picture this. Jamal Washington, who 6 months earlier was giving keynote speeches about financial success, standing in line for a cot next to men who'd been living on the streets for years. Jamal, who used to eat at restaurants where the appetizers cost $50, waiting for donated soup and stale bread. The first night he barely slept. The shelter was loud, it smelled like disinfectant and desperation, and every few minutes someone would cough or snore or have a nightmare that woke up half the room. But here's what's interesting about rock bottom. Sometimes it's the only place where you can build something real. Jamal started working with Marcus, a counselor at the shelter who'd heard his whole sob story about losing his business. Marcus listened patiently as Jamal complained about how unfair everything was, how the media had destroyed him, how his investors had betrayed him. And then Marcus asked the question that changed everything. What role did you play in your own downfall? Jamal's first instinct was to get defensive. To list all the ways he'd been wronged, all the people who'd failed him, all the circumstances beyond his control. But Marcus wasn't buying it. "Son," he said, "I've been working with men in crisis for 15 years. I can tell the difference between someone who's been done wrong and someone who's facing the consequences of their choices. Which one are you?" That conversation happened on a Tuesday night in March. Jamal couldn't sleep after it, not because of the noise in the shelter, but because Marcus's words kept echoing in his head. By Thursday, Jamal was in his first therapy session. Dr. Patricia Coleman was a no-nonsense therapist who specialized in helping people rebuild after losing everything. She'd worked with executives who'd embezzled money, politicians who'd been caught in scandals, celebrities who'd destroyed their careers with bad choices. In their first session, she asked Jamal to tell her about his childhood. Jamal launched into his practice speech about growing up in foster care, about his grandmother, about building himself from nothing. Dr. Coleman stopped him mid-sentence. "Mr. Washington, I've read the articles about you. I know that story isn't true. If you want my help, we're going to need to start with honesty." And for the first time in maybe a decade, Jamal told the truth about his mother. He told Dr. Coleman about the cramped apartment, about Keisha working double shifts, about being embarrassed by her uniform, her car, her inability to afford the things his friends' parents could buy. He told her about lying to his college friends about where he came from, about gradually cutting contact with Keisha, about the day he decided to reinvent his entire background. Dr. Coleman listened without judgment, taking notes, nodding occasionally. When he finished, she asked, "Why were you so ashamed of a woman who sacrificed everything for you?" And that's when Jamal broke down crying for the second time in his adult life. The first had been outside his mother's door 8 months earlier. "Because I thought love was supposed to look different," he sobbed. "I thought success meant leaving everything behind, including the people who helped you get there." Dr. Coleman handed him a tissue and said something that would stay with him forever. "Success built on shame isn't success at all. It's just an expensive way to run from yourself." Over the next 6 months, Jamal worked 2 jobs. Days, he worked construction with a crew that rebuilt homes in low-income neighborhoods. Nights, he worked as a janitor at an office building downtown. The construction job was Marcus's idea. "You need to learn what real work feels like," he said. "You need to understand the value of building something with your hands instead of just manipulating numbers and narratives." Jamal's first day on the construction site was humbling in ways he couldn't have imagined. His hands blistered within hours. His back ached from carrying materials. The other workers could tell he'd never done physical labor before. But something unexpected happened. As his hands got tougher and his body got stronger, his mind started getting clearer. There was something honest about construction work. You either built the wall straight or you didn't. You either showed up on time or you didn't. You either did your job right or the whole project suffered. There was no way to fake it, no way to manipulate the outcome, no way to blame someone else if you messed up. For the first time in his life, Jamal was earning money he felt he actually deserved. The janitor job was different but equally important. Cleaning offices at night, emptying trash cans, mopping floors that would get dirty again the next day. It was invisible work, the kind of work his mother had done for years while he was growing up. One night, while cleaning the executive floor of a financial firm, Jamal found himself staring at the corner office. The desk was massive, the view was incredible, the leather chairs probably cost more than he made in a month. 6 months earlier, he'd had an office just like this one. But standing there with a mop in his hands, he realized something that shocked him. He didn't miss it. Not the office, not the prestige, not even the money. What he missed was the feeling of mattering to someone. What he missed was having people in his life who cared about him for who he was, not what he could do for them. What he missed was his mother. Meanwhile, Keisha's life was transforming in ways that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. After closing the door on Jamal, she'd thrown herself into her nursing studies with a focus that impressed everyone around her. She wasn't just passing her classes, she was excelling. Her professors started noticing her insights, her natural ability to connect with patients, her leadership skills during clinical rotations. At 58 years old, Keisha was discovering talents she never knew she had. 6 months after starting the program, she was offered a paid internship at Rush University Medical Center. Not just any internship, but one in their cardiac care unit, working with patients who'd had heart attacks and strokes. It was demanding work, but Keisha thrived in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. She had a gift for talking to patients who were scared, who felt like their bodies had betrayed them, who didn't know if they'd ever feel normal again. Maybe it was because she understood what it felt like to have your heart broken and wonder if it would ever heal. Dr. Amanda Foster, the head of the cardiac unit, started asking Keisha to work with their most difficult patients. The ones who were angry, depressed, resistant to treatment. Keisha had a way of getting through to them that the other nurses couldn't replicate. Mrs. Patterson, a 72-year-old woman who'd had a massive heart attack, refused to do her physical therapy exercises. She was convinced she was going to die anyway, so why bother? Keisha sat with her for an hour after her shift ended and shared something she'd never told anyone. She told Mrs. Patterson about spending 30 years believing her worth came from how much she could sacrifice for someone else. She talked about learning to value herself enough to set boundaries, even when it hurt. Mrs. Patterson started doing her exercises the next day. Mr. Johnson, a 45-year-old man who'd had a heart attack at his desk, was furious at everyone and everything. He yelled at doctors, threw food trays, refused to take his medications. Keisha recognized the anger for what it was, fear disguised as rage. She told him about watching her son lie about her on television, about feeling invisible and worthless, about the rage that almost consumed her before she learned to transform it into something productive. Mr. Johnson broke down crying and admitted he was terrified of dying and leaving his young children without a father. Word started getting around the hospital about Keisha Washington, the nursing student who could reach patients nobody else could help. Dr. Foster called her into her office one day with an offer that would change everything. "Keisha," she said, "I've been watching you work with our patients for months. You have a gift that can't be taught. When you graduate, I want to offer you a full-time position here, but not just as a floor nurse." Dr. Foster explained that the hospital was launching a new program for cardiac patients who were struggling with depression and anxiety after their heart events. They needed someone to run it, someone who understood trauma and healing from a personal perspective. The job would come with a salary of $75,000 a year. More money than Keisha had ever made in her life. More money than she'd ever dreamed of making. It would also come with respect, recognition, and the knowledge that she was helping people heal from more than just physical wounds. Keisha accepted the offer, but she asked for one condition. She wanted to finish her nursing degree first. She wanted to earn it the right way, without any shortcuts. Dr. Foster agreed, and added something that made Keisha's eyes water. She said, "Keisha, in 30 years of medicine, I've rarely met someone who understands healing the way you do. You're going to change lives in this job." For the first time in her life, Keisha felt truly valued for who she was, not just for what she could sacrifice for someone else. But here's where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. 3 weeks after Keisha accepted her dream job, she got a phone call that would test everything she'd learned about forgiveness, boundaries, and second chances. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while she was studying for her final exams. The number wasn't familiar, but something made her answer it. "Ms. Washington." The voice was professional, formal. "This is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Chicago Police Department. I'm calling about your son, Jamal Washington." Keisha's heart stopped. "Is he hurt? Is he dead?" "No, ma'am, he's not hurt. But he's been arrested." "Arrested? For what?" Detective Martinez explained that Jamal had been charged with wire fraud and money laundering in connection with his failed business. The federal investigation that had been going on for months had finally resulted in charges. He could face up to 20 years in prison. The detective continued, "Mr. Washington has been asking to speak with you. He says you're his emergency contact, but our records show you haven't had any contact with him in months." Keisha sank into her chair. After everything that had happened, after 8 months of silence, Jamal had still listed her as his emergency contact. Even after she'd closed the door in his face, he still saw her as the person to call when his world fell apart. Detective Martinez was still talking. "Ms. Washington, he's being held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. Bail has been set at $500,000. He asked me to tell you that he understands if you don't want to help, but he wanted you to know what was happening." Keisha thanked the detective and hung up the phone. Then she sat in her small apartment, the same apartment she'd lived in for 25 years, and tried to figure out what to do. 8 months earlier, she'd found the strength to close her door on a son who denied her existence. She'd learned to value herself enough to refuse to be someone's last resort. But this was different. This wasn't about money or convenience. This was about a young man facing decades in prison for mistakes he'd made when he thought he was untouchable. Keisha called the one person whose judgment she trusted completely. Her friend Denise. Denise listened to the whole story without interrupting. When Keisha finished, there was a long silence on the phone. Finally, Denise said, "Baby, what does your heart tell you to do?" "I don't know," Keisha admitted. 8 months ago, I had to protect myself from being used. But this isn't about me anymore. This is about a young man who's about to lose his freedom, maybe his whole life." Denise asked the question that cut straight to the heart of everything. "Do you think he's actually changed, or is this just another crisis where he needs you to save him?" "That's what I don't know," Keisha said. "And I'm scared to find out." The next day, Keisha did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She went to see Jamal in jail. She'd never been inside a correctional facility before. The metal detectors, the guards, the locked doors, the institutional smell of disinfectant and desperation. It was overwhelming. When they brought Jamal out, Keisha barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, a lot of weight. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. His hair was cut short, his face was clean-shaven, and there was something different in his eyes. He looked younger somehow and older at the same time. They sat across from each other at a metal table, separated by bulletproof glass, talking through phones. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Finally, Jamal spoke. "Mama, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." His voice was different too. Quieter, less confident, but somehow more genuine than she'd heard it in years. "I almost didn't," Keisha admitted. "I've been sitting in my car for an hour trying to decide if this was a mistake." Jamal nodded. "Understand. I know I have no right to ask anything of you." Then he did something that shocked her. He apologized. Not the desperate, manipulative apology he'd given outside her door 8 months earlier, but something deeper. "Mama, I need you to know that I understand now what I did to you. Not just the lying about you in interviews, but the years before that. The way I was embarrassed of you, the way I made you feel small, the way I treated your love like it was worthless." Keisha listened, watching his face carefully for signs of manipulation, for the practiced sincerity he'd perfected during his business years. But what she saw was different. This was raw, unpolished, real. "I've been in therapy," he continued. "I've been working construction jobs, cleaning offices at night, sleeping in homeless shelters. And somewhere in all of that, I started to understand what you gave up for me." He paused, took a shaky breath. "I started to understand that the woman I was so ashamed of was actually the strongest person I'd ever known. And I threw that away because I was too immature and selfish to see your worth." Keisha felt tears starting to form, but she blinked them back. She needed to stay clear-headed. "Jamal," she said, "I'm glad you're in therapy. I'm glad you're learning to see things differently. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She leaned forward slightly. "Are you sorry because you got caught, or are you sorry because you finally understand the hurt you caused?" It was the question that would determine everything that happened next. Jamal was quiet for so long that Keisha wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 6 months ago, I would have told you I was sorry for hurting you, and I would have meant it. But honestly, I think I would have been more sorry about getting caught." He looked directly at her through the glass. "But these past 8 months, working with my hands, sleeping next to men who've lost everything, cleaning up after people who don't even see me as human, I started to understand something different." He paused. "I started to understand that the person I became wasn't just bad for you, it was bad for me. I stopped being able to form real relationships with anyone because I was always calculating what they could do for me or what I needed to hide from them." Keisha watched his face carefully as he spoke. "When Ashley left me, I was angry at her for being shallow and only caring about money. But the truth is, I never let her see the real me either. I never told her about you, about where I came from, about the struggles that shaped me. How could she love me when I never showed her who I actually was?" This was hitting different than his apology 8 months earlier. "Mama, I'm not asking you to bail me out. I'm not asking you to hire lawyers or fix this situation. I know I need to face the consequences of what I did." "Then why did you ask me to come here?" Keisha asked. "Because I needed you to know that your love wasn't wasted on me. It just took me 30 years and losing everything to become worthy of it." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "And because I needed to tell you that watching you close that door on me was the best thing that ever happened to me. You saved my life by refusing to save me." For the first time in the conversation, Keisha smiled slightly. "That's a hell of a thing to say to your mother." "It's the truth. If you'd let me move back in with you, I would have used you as a soft place to land while I figured out how to get back to my old life. I would have learned nothing. I would have changed nothing." Jamal leaned forward in his chair. "But when you closed that door, you forced me to face myself for the first time in my adult life. And what I saw wasn't pretty." They talked for another hour. Jamal told her about his jobs, his therapy, his daily routine at the shelter. He told her about learning to work with his hands, about finding dignity in honest labor, about forming friendships with people who had nothing to offer him except authenticity. Keisha told him about nursing school, about her new job, about discovering talents she never knew she had. As their visiting time came to an end, Keisha asked the question she'd been dreading. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing," Jamal said immediately. "I called you because if I'm going to prison for 20 years, I wanted you to know that I finally became the man you raised me to be. Even if it happened too late to matter." But then he paused. "Actually, that's not completely true. There is one thing I need from you." Keisha tensed, waiting for the ask, the manipulation, the request that would prove this was all an elaborate performance. "I need you to be proud of the life you're building. I need you to know that even though I wasted the opportunities your sacrifices gave me, your love wasn't wasted. Look what you've accomplished at 58 years old. Look how you're helping people heal. That's your legacy, not the mess I made of my life." Keisha stood up to leave, but before she could go, Jamal said one more thing. "Mama, I love you. Not because I need something from you, but because you're the most remarkable person I've ever known, and it took me 30 years to be mature enough to see it." Keisha walked out of that jail with her mind spinning. Was this real? Was Jamal truly changed? Or was this just a more sophisticated version of the manipulation he'd always been capable of? She spent the next week agonizing over what to do. On one hand, everything about that visit felt different. The way he spoke, the way he looked at her, the things he said. If he was acting, he was giving the performance of his life. On the other hand, she'd learned the hard way not to trust her maternal instincts when it came to Jamal. Her love for him had made her blind to his selfishness for too many years. Denise listened to Keisha's recap of the jail visit and asked the practical question. "Even if he has changed, what are you supposed to do about it? You can't bail him out even if you wanted to. You don't have $500,000. "That's not what he's asking for," Keisha said. "He's not asking for anything." "Then what's the problem?" Denise asked. "The problem is that I don't know if I can handle watching him go to prison for 20 years, even after everything he did to me." Denise was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised Keisha. "Maybe the question isn't whether you can handle it. Maybe the question is whether he can handle it, and whether going through it will complete the transformation he started." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe the best thing you can do for him is exactly what you've been doing. Love him enough to let him face his consequences without trying to rescue him. But be there for him while he does it. Not as his savior, but as his mother who finally sees him clearly." That conversation led to a decision that would define the next chapter of both their lives. Keisha decided to write to Jamal in jail. Not to offer help, not to promise she'd wait for him, but to tell him something she'd never been able to say when she was too busy trying to fix his problems. Her letter was 3 pages long, and it said everything she'd learned about love, accountability, and second chances. She told him that she was proud of the man he was becoming, even in jail. She told him that his willingness to face consequences without asking her to rescue him was the first truly adult thing she'd ever seen him do. She told him about her new job, about helping heart attack patients learn to heal from trauma, about finding purpose in her own life instead of just living for his success. And she told him that when he got out of prison, if he got out, there would be a place in her life for him. Not the place he used to occupy, where he could use her as a safety net, but a new place built on mutual respect and honest communication. But she also made something very clear. She was no longer waiting for him to become worthy of her love. She was living her own life, building her own legacy, and helping people heal. Whether he chose to be part of that life when he was ready was up to him. Jamal wrote back 2 weeks later. His letter was shorter than hers, but every word felt carefully chosen. He thanked her for the letter and for the boundaries she'd set. He told her that knowing she was building a life she was proud of made it easier for him to face whatever was coming. He told her that he'd pled guilty to all charges and was likely looking at 8 to 12 years instead of 20. His cooperation with the investigation and his acceptance of responsibility had convinced the prosecutors to recommend a lighter sentence. Most importantly, he told her that he wasn't counting on her to wait for him. He was going to use his time in prison to continue growing, to get his college degree, to work on himself so that whenever he was released, he would be someone worthy of the second chance she was offering. The last line of his letter read, "Thank you for loving me enough to let me fall, and for being there to catch me when I finally learned how to fly." Over the next 6 months they exchanged letters monthly. Keisha told him about her patients, about the cardiac recovery program she was developing, about the speaking engagement she was being invited to give about healing from family trauma. Jamal told her about his classes, about the job training programs he was enrolled in, about the other inmates he was mentoring who reminded him of his younger self. Their relationship was becoming something it had never been before. Honest. For the first time in decades, they were talking to each other as real people instead of playing the roles of martyr mother and ungrateful son. And then, 8 months after Jamal went to prison, something happened that would test every boundary Keisha had learned to set. She got a call from a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell their story. The filmmaker, Maria Santos, had read about Jamal's case and done some research into his background. She'd discovered the truth about his mother, about the lies he'd told, about the confrontation that went viral. She wanted to make a documentary about family trauma, forgiveness, and second chances. She wanted to interview both Keisha and Jamal and show how they were rebuilding their relationship. The catch. She was offering to pay Keisha $100,000 for her participation. $100,000. More money than Keisha had ever seen in her life. Enough to pay off her student loans, move to a better apartment, maybe even help with Jamal's legal fees. But it would mean exposing their private healing process to the world. It would mean turning their family trauma into entertainment. It would mean doing exactly what Jamal had done years earlier when he built his career on lies about his background. Keisha called Denise immediately. "They want to pay me $100,000 to talk about Jamal and our relationship on camera. That's a lot of money, baby. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it feels like blood money. Like I'd be profiting off our pain the same way he did." But Denise asked a question that made Keisha think. What if you could use the platform to help other people who are dealing with family trauma? What if you could turn this into something that helps families heal instead of just exploiting your story for ratings? Keisha hadn't thought about it that way. She asked Maria Santos what angle the documentary would take. Maria explained that she wanted to show the complexity of forgiveness, the difficulty of setting boundaries with people you love, and the possibility of rebuilding relationships after devastating betrayals. She didn't want to make Jamal into a villain or Keisha into a saint. She wanted to show how two people could hurt each other deeply and still find a way back to love. Keisha agreed to do the documentary, but with conditions. She wanted editorial input over how their story was told. She wanted part of her fee to go toward funding family therapy programs for low-income families. And she wanted the documentary to include resources for people dealing with similar family trauma. Most importantly, she wanted Jamal's consent before moving forward. When she wrote to him about the documentary offer, his response surprised her. He wrote back immediately, saying he thought it was a great idea, but only if she was comfortable with it. He told her that if their story could help even one family avoid the pain they'd been through, it would give meaning to all the mistakes he'd made. But he also told her something that proved how much he'd grown. He refused to accept any payment for his participation. "If we're going to do this," he wrote, "it should be about helping people, not about making money off our trauma." The documentary filmed over 6 months. Keisha did interviews at the hospital where she worked, talking about how her experience with family trauma had made her better at helping patients heal from their own emotional wounds. Jamal did interviews from prison, talking honestly about his shame, his lies, and the process of learning to take responsibility for his choices. The most powerful moment came when they interviewed each other over video chat, with cameras capturing both sides of the conversation. Jamal asked Keisha a question that made her cry. What would you tell other mothers who are dealing with children who don't appreciate their sacrifices? Keisha's answer became the most quoted moment of the entire documentary. I would tell them that unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional enablement. You can love your child completely and still require them to treat you with respect. You can sacrifice for your child and still maintain your own dignity. And I would tell them that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to save someone from the consequences of their choices. Because consequences teach lessons that rescue never can. The documentary, titled Closed Doors, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and won the Audience Award for Best Documentary Feature. It went on to be distributed nationally and became one of the most talked about documentaries of the year. But more importantly, it started conversations in families across the country about boundaries, respect, and healthy love. Keisha used her platform to speak at conferences about family dynamics and trauma healing. She started a non-profit organization that provided therapy services for families dealing with similar issues. And Jamal, still in prison, started facilitating support groups for inmates who wanted to rebuild relationships with family members they'd hurt. Their story became bigger than just their story. It became a roadmap for other families trying to navigate the space between love and accountability. Today, Keisha is 60 years old and thriving in ways she never imagined possible. She runs the Cardiac Trauma Recovery Program at one of Chicago's premier hospitals. She speaks at conferences around the country. She's written a book about healing from family trauma that's being published next year. She's in a healthy relationship with Robert, the kind man who sees her worth and treats her accordingly. Most importantly, she's built a life she's genuinely proud of, a life that doesn't revolve around trying to fix someone else's problems. Jamal has 3 more years left on his sentence. When he gets out, he'll be 38 years old with a college degree in social work and a clear understanding of who he is without money or status or lies. He and Keisha write to each other every week now. Their letters are honest, respectful, and full of genuine affection. They're building something new together. Not the codependent relationship they used to have, but something healthier. Something based on mutual respect instead of guilt and obligation. Will their relationship survive his release from prison? Will Jamal be able to maintain the growth he's achieved? Or will he revert to old patterns when he's faced with freedom and temptation again? I don't know. Nobody does. But I know this. Keisha Washington learned the most important lesson any parent can learn. She learned that loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself. She learned that you can forgive someone without forgetting the lessons their betrayal taught you. And she learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone you love is no. So here's my question for you, and I want to hear your honest thoughts in the comments. Was Keisha right to participate in the documentary and profit from their trauma, or should family pain stay private? Is it exploitation or education when you share your story for money, even if you're using the platform to help others? And here's the bigger question. Do you think Jamal's transformation is real, or is this just a more sophisticated version of the manipulation he's always been capable of? Because let me tell you something, the comments on the original video are still going strong, and people are more divided than ever. Team Keisha says she's a warrior who learned to protect herself and use her experience to help others heal. Team Jamal says he's genuinely changed and deserves credit for taking responsibility without asking for rescue. Team Nobody thinks they're both profiting off trauma and turning family dysfunction into entertainment. And then there's Team Complicated, which is where I land. I think real life is messier than the neat categories we like to put people in. I think Keisha made mistakes as a mother, but learned from them and became stronger. I think Jamal was selfish and cruel, but appears to be genuinely working to become better. I think their story is simultaneously inspiring and uncomfortable, hopeful and heartbreaking. But mostly I think it's real. And real stories don't have perfect endings. They have complicated, ongoing, ever-evolving middles. So what do you think? Are you Team Keisha, Team Jamal, Team Nobody, or Team Complicated? And if you think you know how this story ends when Jamal gets out of prison in 3 years, predict it in the comments. Will he stay changed or go back to his old ways? Will Keisha's boundaries hold up when he's actually free? Make sure you're subscribed because part 3 is coming and it's going to blow your mind. The prison release, the real test of whether people can truly change, and a twist that's going to make parts 1 and 2 look like warm-ups. Hit that notification bell because when part 3 drops, you're going to want to be first in the comments claiming you called it.